Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in again today. Today we have Mr. Tyranitar the Ackies, Lizard Dad. We're going to have a conversation hopefully about health, husbandry, welfare, care-being of odatria, as well as obviously Ackie monitors, which Mr. Tyranitar the Ackies dad specialises in. So yeah, whereabouts did it start for you? When did you realise that you like scaly animals? And sort of when was your first, I guess being, because I believe you're in Florida, so I guess the biodiversity of reptiles for you probably would have been exposed to it a lot more as a kid. So when did it start?
Yeah, and so my lizard dad. I'm the lizard dad. So my name is Eric Loskamp. I'm a vet here in the States. Really, my love of reptiles has kind of started when I was little. Like I've always kind of liked I started with dinosaurs and then kind of went to living reptiles and everything like that. And I was just constantly reading books. I was watching nature documentaries like Steve Irwin, Nat Geo Kids, and then when I had a bearded dragon, I had a diamondback terrapin turtle, and then really what kind of like set me down, like kind of the reptile, like really got me into reptiles was I was volunteering at the Staten Island Zoo. I was doing like their docent program. So I was essentially like holding animals out and I was talking to people about animals and I was like letting people interact with them. And a lot of the animals I worked with were reptiles. And so I was working with like a 8-foot long boa constrictor. I was working with some uromastics, but like honestly, the one animal I really have the best memory with was this savanna monitor named Ivan, and like it was like I just really got to see how affectionate monitor lizards in general can be, and like because like there was this one moment I will never forget it. It was like I was just having the animal in my hand, and Ivan just kind of like had him in my arms, and he just kind of like crawled onto my chest, and he just sat there. And so it was just like this really nice, warm moment. And like, I just really got to interact with this animal. I got really close to him. And I mean, granted, being a savanna monitor had some, he definitely was obese, had some other issues. And then there was one day I was working with him and it's just like his eyes were sunken in. And I'm like, I just like in my gut, I'm like, something just doesn't seem right. And then just because I was in high school at the time, I had exams. I wasn't able to go in for a couple of weeks. I came back and Ivan had passed away. And so that was really like my kind of like that was like I think the pivotal moment that kind of like made me say, you know what, I really want to be a vet. I want to really work with these animals. And then fast forward, I'm still like really into reptiles and I got more into bird watching, things like that. My first year of vet school, like I'm living on my own for the first time, I'm not, and I'm like in my own apartment. I don't have a roommate. I'm like, I really want somebody. And I'm like, how about a reptile? And then I started doing research back into reptiles again. I got a Euromastix named Drogon, and he was like my first pet since like my bearded dragon, my turtle that I really had. That was like my own reptile, and I had him for a couple months, and then I kind of just saw him decline. It was crazy. It was like I just noticed one night he was just sleeping on the cool side of his enclosure, and so I brought him into my vet school, and we did blood work, we did diagnostics. He was fine. And then I just continued just to see him lose weight. And then eventually, he just got to the point where he was just thin and bones. And he was just like, he was extremely septic. And that just means like he just overall really bad systemic infection. And so I had to euthanize him. And so that was rough. And then I waited a couple months. And then it was like pretty much when I got my Euromastix, when I got Drogon, the other species I actually was wanting to get was also Ackies. And just give him space and kind of just where I was living at the time, I was like, you know what, like I can't really get a monitor lizard right now. Let me get the Euromastix first, and then kind of see what happens from here. And then when Drogon had passed, I really started like I spent like I think from when Drogon had passed to when I got Charizard, my first Ackie, I spent like it was like 10 plus months of research. I was like reading care guides. I was on YouTube. Like I was watching Professor Herp's videos, TLS13's videos. I was like pretty much any interviews with any Ackie monitor breeders. Like there was a video, like John Adradna Jr. did a video on like Ball Python TV or something like that. And then Dave Kaufman did his Ackies in the Wild video. And then I eventually I got Charizard, and so he was my first Ackie. I got him. I had him for like a year and a half, and I was already in love with monitor lizards because that's why I got an Ackie. But then when I had Charizard, that love only grew because I really got to bond with him. Like he was my son. Like I would open the door, he would crawl out onto my arm, and he was super friendly,
Yeah.
super outgoing. He was a great lizard. And then, he started then in like March of this past year, he just started not using his back legs, and it was the strangest thing. So then I started like working him up. I thought he injured his back because he did something like that, you know, in the past. And also he had been struggling. I was struggling with weight on him, and he was a little obese. So I'm like, okay, maybe he injured his back, and maybe the fat in him kind of like destabilized his back when he jumped off of me one time, and maybe like this is just a recurrence of that back injury. And we did all the diagnostics, we did blood work, we did all of this. He just continued not to eat. He was losing muscle mass in his back legs. And then there was this one day I came back from being on the clinics, and like I was on my large animal medicine rotation at the time, and then I just saw him. He had like these blood tinged urates, like these really like tarry blood tinged urates in his enclosure, and he had dried blood all over his vent. So I rushed him back to the vet school, and one of his kidneys looked abnormal, and so we gave him some fluids, we did all of that. And then that following Monday, I brought him to the vet school to try to get surgery to potentially remove that affected kidney. And by that, he died on the surgery table. And that was a hard loss. And it still messes me up even today. And
Yeah.
then I had some friends in the monitor lizard community that I had made through making Charizard's Instagram, and they were very generous, and they had gifted me this little guy that's behind me, and this one is Tyranitar. So I got Tyranitar in April, and I've been having him ever since. And it's been really nice just to have an Ackie in my household, because I realized with Charizard, like I will never be living my life without an Ackie monitor in it. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I get that completely, because for obviously us, we love these animals and they are our babies. But when you're talking to someone who's not into reptiles, when you say like it's your son, I fully get that. I have a human child that's actually mine, and then I have multiple scaly children, and sometimes it's a hard toss up. So I do get that, and I can understand sort of where your loves come from, and I can definitely understand why you've gone into like veterinary medicine, because it sounds like you had a bit of a rough start in the reptile hobby. What do you think was the lead sort of reason for the Savannah Monitor as well as Charizard being slightly overweight? Do you think that was bad care guides telling you to feed too much? Do you think that was a bad choice of feeders, or what do you think that was?
So, I mean, with the Savannah Monitor, I can't, with Ivan, I can't really, that was so many years ago. And, granted, husbandry has evolved rapidly, between that time. So it's kind of hard for me to really comment on that care. And, granted, he was at an AZA institution. So, definitely was getting, definitely quality care. So I can't really speak on him too much. But definitely with Charizard and what I'm kind of doing differently with Tyranitar, I definitely think that I don't think it was the quality of feeders, as I hardly ever gave Charizard eggs. I avoided really non-whole prey items. And if I did do it, I would like heavily supplement calcium, and it was like only a couple of times. I really only did egg. It's like I didn't touch pinkies. I didn't really touch any of the fish or anything like that, because I just was like, not nutritious. It's very high in fat. And honestly, with the pinkies too, like they just have very poor calcium. So I just kind of typically avoid those. But I think it was just overfeeding. It was just honestly overfeeding, because when Charizard, from when he was a baby to, I was just feeding him every day, and even when he was an adult. And I think I kind of just missed. I think he was fine for a little bit, but then, over time, I think there's a lot of times, and I think, people don't realize this either. It's like not just like the tail base with a reptile where you can kind of see their body condition. A lot of reptiles actually have these fat pads inside of their body cavity, and that's like where they actually store the majority of their fat. Like, there are some exceptions, like leopard geckos, have their tails that they store fat in. Other reptiles store fat in their tails, but a lot of them have these fat pads. And so when those fat pads get enlarged, that can compress their GI tracts, that can compress their lung fields, so that can make them, not want to move around as much because they don't have the same lung capacity. They may not be eating as much. But I think it was like he had reached like, adulthood, and I was still kind of feeding him the same way I was when he was a baby. And I think that there was that disconnect there. So I don't think it was necessarily, for Charizard's case, like I don't think it was inappropriate food items. I think it was too much of the correct food,
too much,
food
yeah.
items. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get that, because I get multiple messages on multiple species about how they say literally how many bugs should I feed, and I say that I personally, I don't go 5 bugs on a Monday, 6 bugs on a Wednesday. Sometimes, depending if I'm breeding, I try. So let's just speak on ackies for now. So for my ackies, through the summer, they get fed. My breeding females, when gravid, get fed every day. Otherwise, they get fed twice a week, on average. But then I'll have a winter period where I'll pretty much starve them, and they might get fed once every 10 days. But then, like you say, I look at the body, and to the lateral folds on varanids down their sides, they have like a pinch bit of skin. For anyone that doesn't know, if that's disappeared, either 1, she's gravid, or 2, they're getting too big. So I personally lay off the food a little bit. But if the little pinch almost comes away from the body, almost like a nipple, like a dimple, then you know they're getting a bit too skinny. As well as, like you say, the tail base is a key point. I personally didn't know about the little fat pads, because that makes sense with my Tristus, because she was we'll get on to her in a bit, but she was gaping for air while she was going through her little, and that probably makes sense where she was so obese. She was having too much weight on her lungs and like her esophagus. So that's why she was almost like gaping and gagging at the same time. So she was probably she just couldn't breathe. But back onto the feeding, I switched between roaches and locusts, or grasshoppers if you're in America, as a general, and then I'll throw in the odd like silkworm, hornworm. I personally don't really feed pinkies or prawns or fish, like you say. I don't think it's needed for ackies. But for anyone who's wondering on an ackie what to feed and how often to feed, from what you've learned, what would you recommend for now?
I think,
like, if someone's...
Yeah, so I think what I recommend is, honestly, like, I think the base of their diet should be locusts, like locusts or grasshoppers, depending on where you are. And then you should then supplement with some cricket or some roaches, and then supplement with other insects, like, crickets, black soldier fly larvae are really good. If your lizard takes them, I tried it with mine. He did not like them at all. Hornworms are good as an occasional treat. It's just hornworms are literally just water bags. So for hydration, I think that they're really good, but I wouldn't feed them regularly because they don't provide anything. But I think the main thing, one, is a variety is key. But I think of that variety, I think if you look, grasshopper should be the majority, because there are some studies, and like I kind of like, as you can talk about, we'll talk about the study that I'm starting and I'm looking into with gout in these animals. But when you go to like the Veranidae journal, like, or BioWalk, there's actually a study that looks at the stomach contents of ackies, wild ackies, and the main animal that is the main food item that makes up their stomach content is grasshoppers. And so I definitely think that I try, and I have some grasshoppers here, so I'm trying to make the majority of his diet that.
No, I agree with that. They did you've probably seen it, but they did a study on macraei, so blue tree monitors as well, and their gut content was 99.9. Well, just say 99%, like katydids and grasshoppers. But myself included, I don't have macraei, I have Prasinus, so green tree monitors. I'm guilty for every now and then giving them a chick, or every now and then giving them a rat pup. For those sort of monitors, even with my mangrove monitor, if it's once a month, if that, but if I do give them rodent, I make sure it's hairless, just because that hair does clog them up. But even my mangrove, even she's 90% bugs, and then she'll get the odd shrimp, or I gave her octopus the other day. She gets fish, she gets crabs, crustaceans, and insects. But back onto the ackies, I'd say I'm probably 50-50. So maybe I even need to reflect myself. I'm 50-50 locusts, cockroaches. So maybe I should push more 90-10, or even 99-1. And then once a month, once every now and then, like you say, I'll mix it up and get something a bit different. I tried earthworms the other day just to sort of see what would happen, but they didn't even touch them.
Yeah,
they weren't interested.
I feel
at all.
And like, I feel like there's individuals too, like and it's like they're very funny. Like the charizard, for instance, like he did not touch superworms. Like it's just like they were too wiggly for him, and it's like I think he was just a bit of a baby with that, and kind of like not to anthropomorphize too much. It's just like it was too much work, and he's like, I don't care. But like I fed Tyranitar a superworm every now and then, and he's like, okay. I typically don't like superworms as feeders. I think they're way too fatty. Like I don't recommend them to clients either for really any reptile. But if you feed them an occasional superworm, that's okay. But that was just an example of like it's just like they're very individual. So you got to find what feeder insects like they like. But typically, I feel like every single one I only have an N of 2, but they both have devoured the grasshoppers. They both devoured the roaches.
Yeah. I'm sure most people who keep monitors know, but obviously reach out to Kai Fan in America because he'll hook you up. He'll hook you up with grasshoppers. In the UK and in Europe, we're quite fortunate because locusts are just so readily available. So there's no excuse if you're European to not introduce locusts into your dietary sort of with your varanids and all of my species. So other than my Prasinus, the green trees, my Jobiensis, which I'm looking at now, my peach throat and my Indicus, my mangrove monitor, all of my other species are odatria, and they all get, for the most part, locusts, and all of my monitors will eat locusts. So I'm with you on there, locusts / grasshoppers for the most part. And then as regards for me, for feeding, people say, oh, when, like you say, you just fed every day even as they get older. Like when should people change? Would you say, would you recommend? Obviously, it's every animal individually.
Right.
And I know there's no answer. But if you're just talking to someone, blanket terms, someone's watching this, they've got a 8-month-old Ackie. Some Ackie monitors will breed at 8 months, some won't. So again, anyone watching it is a very blanket term. But just as a general, I'll go first. So for me, because obviously I breed them and I raise babies for me are every day. And even then, my babies aren't always every day. Sometimes I will skip a day or two, just because for me in the wild, they'll be gorging themselves when they come across like a herd of locusts. And then 2 days later, they're pouring down with rain and they're hunkered down or whatever because it's in the winter or whatever the case may be. And then they'll come back out because all the bugs are out and then they'll gorge. And then 6 to 8 months, I would say for me, you want to be dropping down to around 3 to 4 times a week. And then as they push a year to 18 months, for me, I'd say twice a week. It's different if you're trying to breed, but in this instance, we're just talking about one pet. And for the amount, it's lizard dependent for me. But sometimes I'll feed like 6 or 7 roaches and then not feed them for 4 or 5 days. Sometimes I'll give them like 13 grasshoppers to chase around and then they won't get fed for a week. But then sometimes I'll put 2 grasshoppers in there, then the next day put another 2 in there, and then the next day another 2, and then not feed them for 3 or 4 days. So what's your opinion and views on that?
Yeah, I think it's really great that you touched on like the wild, like when they're in the wild and how they gorge themselves, because I feel like, and I see this a lot too, is like a lot, I feel like common kind of when people are like how often to feed or how much to feed, it's like, I feel like a common like bit of advice is like feed as much as they'll eat in 5 minutes. And I think that's really, I think that especially on an obesity talk, that's definitely bad because, you know, in the wild, they're engineered and they're evolved to take advantage of any food source they have. They're super opportunistic. So if you're, they may have been satiated like, you know, 5, 10 crickets ago or like, you know, 3 locusts ago. But if you keep on throwing them food, they're obviously going to still take it because they're like, you're in that kind of negative energy, they're in that instinctual negative energy state that I must collect all this food. So what I've done with Tyranitar at least is that like I was feeding him every day up until 6 months, and I was doing like reduced amounts. Like for instance, like I was feeding Charizard like 20 crickets, and like I would do like, you know, 10 mealworms or something like that, or like, you know, 4 or 5 roaches. But like with him, I did like 5 crickets. Like I would do Tyranitar, like I would do 5 crickets or 3 crickets depending on how big they were. I would do like maybe 2 mealworms. I would do like 2 roaches, and then like, you know, as he's gotten bigger, I've like increased how much I'm feeding him per feeding. And then when he hit 6 months, I switched to every other day feeding. And so he's currently 8 months now. He's about to be 9 months the 30th of September. But so he's on every other day feeding right now. And I'm still kind of doing small portions just because, you know, like like we said, they'll just gorge themselves, I know, if you give them too much. And then for me, like I agree, like once they're a year old, I was going to try to just do 3 times a week. And, you know, I'm not breeding yet. And so I do have in plans, and, you know, I do intend to breed. You know, I do want to get, once I figure out which sex Tyranitar is, I do intend to breed. So, that may change what I do and how I feed, but currently right now, just as a pet for maintenance, I'm just going to be sticking him just to 3 times a week, just because I wish I did that with Charizard a little bit earlier, but with Tyranitar, I'm trying to just like follow that and just see how I think he's doing a lot better.
Yeah, no, it's great that you can be open and honest about it. Because I lost a Tristis monitor recently. If people follow me on Instagram, they might have seen, and I only owned her for 2 months, and she died of what I believe was kidney failure or renal failure. So my mangrove monitor's trying to get out. So if I look down there, that's why. She does this all the time because she's not used to me sitting in this room. But yeah, anyway, Tristis, she was double the weight she should have been, and the guy I got her from was a sound guy, like knew his stuff. There's no point in saying he didn't. He just knew his stuff. And I think a lot of people can almost, like you said, kill animals with kindness. So like, oh, they're hungry. And like you say, we anthropomorphize. And because we get hungry daily as mammalian, like warm-blooded, but the difference is obviously we need food to keep our body at a set temperature so we can function. Whereas reptiles, they don't need the food for the energy, they need the heat for the energy, and then they need the heat to digest the food. And I'm sort of digressing, so I'll get back to that in a second. But I had the Tristis, and I shared on my Instagram that she passed away due to obesity, and I believe she was fed a majority of a rodent diet because she couldn't have got as big as she got, because she was a female Tristis, and she was 62 centimeters total length, and a big Tristis female is 50-ish, 55 centimeters. So she's already massively in size, and she was 422 grams when she should be around 200 grams. And there was literally nothing I could do. I tried to help her, but I think me putting on her a diet, after listening to you speak now, has made me think putting on her a diet put her body into shock. She probably already had those issues. And then the fact that I tried to starve her, her body probably, so it was probably on me. It was probably going to happen regardless, but I probably sped up the process. So it's hard to know for me as just an average keeper, taking on an obese animal, or I fed my lizard a bit too much, and oh my god, it's, for example, one of my Timors is getting quite big, so I've noticed it because they're quite a shy species, so I don't see them. And he was out today, and I've gone, because he lives with his 2 girlfriends, and I've gone, he's getting all the food, he's eating all the pies. So now it's very much like I need to separate the male and do this and do that. So do you have any tips for someone trying to diet for their varanid?
Yeah, and so and I know we're talking about obesity and things like that too. Like, it's not just the fat pads that are compressing, the organs that can be a problem. Also, and we were talking about savanna monitors earlier. So, they're poster children for this disease because of inappropriate diets. But another consequence of obesity in really all reptiles, but especially monitor lizards as well, is something called hepatic lipidosis, or fatty liver disease. And so, essentially, when it's just the liver just accumulates a bunch of fat, it starts to not function properly, because like the liver is important for detoxifying the blood and all the bodily functions and things like that, and for metabolism. But if the liver starts to become overwhelmed by fat, that can be a problem. And then what happens in liver animals that have fatty liver disease is that when they get to a negative energy balance, they then start mobilizing all of that fat, and then that creates nasty biochemical processes inside of them that then can lead to death as well. And so, definitely when you have an obese animal, it's hard to say, there are blood tests you can do. Like, so if you bring an obese animal to the vet, there are elevations in like liver enzymes. You can look to see, if you can see the serum has any fat in it, they'll call that lipemic. But, when you're trying to diet them, it's important to do it very gradually, because you don't want the animal to go into an energy crisis. And so, it's hard to say, because with your Tristis, I don't think you should be putting so much blame on yourself, because also it's hard to exactly say, was it the obesity or was it some other underlying disease? Because with reptiles in general, they are so hard to, they're so hardy, and they hide signs super, super well. And so they may have a low burning disease and they may be acting completely fine. And then once they finally, once the disease is overwhelming them, that's when they finally start showing clinical signs. And that's when they're honestly on death. That's when they're really critical and on death's door. So it's kind of hard to say with that. But the main thing when you're trying to diet an obese animal is just to do it gradually. So like when I found out Charizard was obese, I went from like everyday feedings, went to every other day. I kept him at that for a couple of weeks, and then I got him to 3 times a day. So I just gradually allowed his body and his metabolism to adjust to the new food allocation that I was giving him, and then I kind of went with that. And then with dieting, you also then, have to then complement it with exercise and things like that, and it's harder for reptiles because, it's not like a dog where you can just put the leash on them, put the harness on, get them walking around and things like that, because, reptiles are going to just do what they want. And, it depends on your taming process with them, if you can even put a harness on them, if they even want to interact with you. But I think, just providing them lots of enrichment in the enclosure, and, a good enclosure size for that animal. And then just gradually reducing the intake instead of kind of cutting them cold turkey.
Yeah, I think for me, this is a lesson for me and hopefully for others. So when I got her, I was getting her out every day, and it was midsummer in the UK, and we had a bit of a heat wave. So external temperatures were ambient of like 35 degrees. And outside my front door here, there's a big concrete slab, and that would sit at 45, 46 degrees. So she was more than fine to go outside. So I took her outside for 5 to 10 minutes a day, if that, just to try and get her to run around. And where she was so big, I wasn't worried about, one, her escaping because she barely moved. And two, I just figured in open plain, if she could just move around a little bit, new smells, new enrichments, like you say, try and get her, but she just would not move. And like you say, I was like, oh, come on, girl, this is for your own good. And she just would not move. And she lost a little bit of weight, and then she was a bit more responsive to the going outside, and she would walk around a little bit and have a little climb. And I was like, okay, great. But the mistake, like you say, it might be my fault, might not be my fault, but it's all lessons to be learned. But the mistake I made was I was probably only feeding her once a week, as well as trying to exercise her. So her body was in a massive calorie deficit, but she didn't have anything to sustain her. And as in my naive head, and again, willing to learn, but in my naive head, she would feed off the fat of the land as such, the excess. But like, from what I understand from what you're saying, that fat's almost there to stay, and she wouldn't have used it like, say, a human would have. As that's why you need to keep feeding regularly, just less, and then hopefully they burn the fat off via the basking spot and via the enrichment over time, rather than trying to crash course diet her.
Yeah. I mean, that's essentially it. And really kind of like the crash course diet method is just like, I don't recommend that, just because it's not even the fact of like, it's more of the liver function than really the fat pads. So I think the fat pads should, in theory, start to decrease in size as the animal starts, using it in a reasonable way, and, using it like, slowly chipping away at it. It's really when animals are then, when they go into, an obese animal, so that, if you have a regular, happy, healthy animal, you can, it's not nearly as, I still recommend it just so, the animal is like getting used to the new diet slowly, but, it's not the same kind of, like immediacy that it needs to be. But like with an obese animal, it's really more the liver function and kind of creating those, they kind of going into that kind of negative energy balance that you want to avoid.
Yeah. And then I touched on it quickly earlier, but we speak about basking spots, because obviously the basking spot for any varanid is the equivalent of like our body keeping us at 37.5 degrees or whatever it is. The problem I find with, for example, Ackie monitors is when I first got into Ackie monitors, or like you say, we Google, we YouTube, we talk to keepers, we do our research, and you can pick good. That's common. Okay, they need deep substrate. Okay, they need this temperature basking spot. Okay, and they need this UVI. But the problem I found was, if I was a complete novice, I wouldn't know where to start. So a quick Google will tell you an Ackie needs a 30-degree basking spot and or 70-degree basking spot, depending on what website you're on. So it's getting a lot better now, but it's very misleading. So that's why it's always important to do your due diligence and make sure you do as much research as you can if you're looking to get any animal, regardless of species. I personally keep my babies at 50 degrees Celsius, which I think is like 120 something Fahrenheit. and I keep my adults at 65 degrees Celsius, which I think is like 140 or 50. But I have a multitude of a basking spot, so it's almost slanted, so a widespread lamp, so they can pick, so they can get up to 65, or they could pick 50 if they want it. How important is the basking spot, and especially when it comes to burning food and giving the lizards energy? And what sort of temperatures do you personally aim for?
Yeah, and I think it's, I think it's very important. I think a lot of times too, because then that, like, especially when you are using, it's like important to have multiple. So like in my enclosure, I have like a reed stack. So I have a bunch of slate rock. And so I have multiple spots, and I personally like the reed stack method because they can still be hidden, but they can go to the ideal temperature that they need to be. And so they can have choice in that. And then also it's good for removing shed because they can, they remove loose shed as they're moving up and down the rock stack. It's good for thermoregulation. It's good to file their nails down. It's good exercise. So I really like the reed stack approach. For me, I typically I'm keeping my basking spot between 120, 130. I had kept Charizard at like 140, I had kept his a little bit hotter. I think it really just kind of ultimately depends on your animal, because I feel like some animals tend like the lower temperature range, more like the 120, 130. Some like the 150, 160, like 140, 150. So it really ultimately just kind of depends on where your animal is. So like in general, if you've never had an Ackie or you've never seen an Ackie basking, they aren't like a bearded dragon where they're going to bask for hours. They intermittently bask. So they'll be there for 5-10 minutes. They'll run around the enclosure. They'll come back. They'll bask a little bit more, run around again. And that's like typically how they are. And so if you're noticing your animal's basking a little bit longer, you just got to increase the basking temperature. And then if they're hardly ever staying on the basking spot, you got to decrease it. And then so, if you have a smaller enclosure, that's kind of more what you have to do. But if you have one where you have the opportunity to give them like the 150 and the 130, if you have that opportunity, that's like that allows the animal then to choose and have choice in what temperature it wants to be. So if it wants to get really hot, it can, but it doesn't have to choose that temperature to stay that way. So I think that's like the main thing, is like allowing choice and thermoregulation for the animal.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I was going to make all those points, so 100% agree. And for anyone that doesn't know, just Google reed stack, but it's basically rock stacked like this, or wood. There you go, perfect. So the Ackie / any odatria can slip inside the little gaps, and you'll probably find that first thing in the morning they sit on the top where it's the hottest, and then during the day, like you say, they might run onto the top and go, oh, it's a bit hot, and then they go down a level and they go, this is the right temperature, and then they run around. And exactly right, if your monitor of any species is sitting on the basking spot other than first thing in the morning for longer than 10, 15, 20 minutes, and they haven't just been fed a load, if they've got a big full belly, it's common for them to sit under the basking spot. But if they're there for a long period of time, then yeah, exactly right, you want to increase that temperature if they're there. And even if they start like lifting their feet up, then the basking spot's too hot, and the chances are you need to lower the temperature. So yeah, that's perfect. I agree with 100% on all of that. I don't know if you know much about this sort of science, because I'm learning it myself. I'm learning about infrared A and infrared B and infrared C in regards to heating. So to my knowledge, a halogen basking spot is the way you want to go, because it gives you infrared A and infrared B that penetrates the skin of the animal. And then when it heats up a rock, I'd always recommend a rock for Ackies, because it heats up the rock. One, it holds the heat and then releases heat, which gives you infrared C. And also allows you to have that belly heat, helping them to digest. The only thing, I have reed stacks for my baby, so please don't feel like I'm bashing. It's just a question for myself. The only thing I wonder is if an Ackies, for example, on the third tier of the reed stack, they're obviously not benefiting from the UV, infrared A and infrared B, but obviously you have the option, if they want it, they can go onto the top and get it. So we're not depriving them. And again, I've got them in my enclosures, and for babies they're amazing, even for adults, but I especially utilize it for my babies, because like all 10 of them like wedged in there, it's something to behold. It's beautiful. So my question is, do you think they are generally internally smart enough to know, right, I need X amount of UV as well as X amount of infrared A and B. So I will sit on the top, or I've got enough of that, but I still want to warm up, so I will go onto the third shelf, for example.
Yeah, so I think that I definitely think that they are able to, they're able to figure that out. You know, it's just, especially they're able to sense that. So a lot of reptiles in general, they have like a third eye actually on the top of their head called the pineal eye. So it allows them to sense light and dark. So, if they're in the wild, if they have a cloud that's kind of going over their head, they can say, they can sense that, and then they can move to another spot where it's in the sun. Or, if there's a hawk or some other predator that's coming up from above, they can use that to sense it. So I think that definitely plays a role in their heat and kind of like how much they get. And then their body, it's just kind of like internal instincts and mechanisms of like, okay, you know what, I've reached my core body temperature. My body temperature is at what it needs to be. And then they go for it. And, it's different in the wild, because in the wild, the sun is providing the heat, it's providing the UVA, it's providing infrared A, B, and C, so it's a little bit different. I mean, my enclosure, I have one of the Zen habitat enclosures. So it does have a top on it. I do use the mercury vapor bulbs just because it's kind of doing everything in one. I know there's like there's a lot of, I think that each UV bulb has its pros and cons. So like definitely, like I know the tube ones a lot, that's definitely recommended. I think in a different type of enclosure, I definitely would use those. So I think they all have their pros and cons, but for me, I personally like the mercury vapors just because it's providing the heat, it's providing the UVA, it's providing the UVB. And then kind of like what the way my reach stack is set up, it's kind of, he's getting everything that he needs so that he doesn't have to make that choice between UV and the heat. So, and then if you are using like a separate tube UV light with your, with the halogen bulb, with another bulb, like a heat bulb, you just have to make sure that your enclosure is designed in a way so that the basking spot is overlapping for both of them, because you don't want to have the animal choose between heat and UV, because that can lead to metabolic bone disease, things like that. And it's honest, and like with the reach stack too, and like just in general, it's important the animal escapes from the UV, because they can get very bad burns from UV in addition to the heat bulbs.
No, that's perfect. Again,
Yeah.
it's the exact same page as me, so that's completely perfect. It's interesting as well. I haven't done it with any other animal other than my male Prasinus, so the green tree monitor. I have in his setup, or I've changed it now. So I had Basking Spot T5 UVB, and then on the other side of the enclosure, an LED spot. And every single time he would go to the UV stretched over both. I've changed it now, so I'll go into what I've changed it to, but this is what it was. So the UV stretched the entirety of the enclosure, T5, like 6% or whatever it was. And then he had a halogen basking spot and an LED on the other side. And every time in the morning, without fail, every single day, he went to bask under the LED. So like you say, he's seeking light, because the LED was 6,500 Kelvin, so equivalent of daylight, rather than the glowy yellow halogen. And he was seeking light, and he would sit under there for about a minute, and you could see his brain whirring, and he was like, I'm not warming up. So then he would go onto the other side of the enclosure and go, this is where the heat is. So now what I do, and what I'm trying to do, it's not in all of my enclosures yet, but I want to put an LED, a halogen, and then a small, just to fixate on the basking spot, T5, and then have an LED in the enclosure. But like you say, it is very, very important for any reptile to be able to escape the UV, and too much UV exposure is much worse than, I was going to say not enough, but it's not. It's a hard one, isn't it? Yeah. You need the right amount, but too much is just as bad, let's put it that way, as not enough, for different reasons. So yeah, I'm glad that you touched on that. But yeah, it's interesting that you say about seeking the light, because do you have any LEDs in your enclosure?
I do.
Or do you just have
So I have two mercury vapors. I have a 160 watt that is the one that's really providing the main heat. I have another 100 watt here. I then got a smaller halogen bulb, and then I got an LED there. He typically spends a lot of his time around the rock stack, and then after I feed him, he'll then kind of run around a little bit more, and he kind of decides to do that. But he typically, and maybe it's just I don't know exactly what like kind of light frequency. I mean, besides like the UV frequencies the mercury vapors put out, but he typically spends like he'll bask on here and he walks around. So I'm not seeing that same thing, but granted, also ackies are more of a fostorial or burrowing species, and the green trees are more arboreal, and so it may just be
Yeah.
a behavioral thing and a more instinctual thing, a difference between the two.
Yeah, I would have said it's probably because the Australian outback, there's sun.
Yeah.
So you climb on your rocks, you get hot, you go, oh, I'm too hot, you dig underground.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're in the dense rainforest of Papua New Guinea, you're going to be a cryptic basker. So the sun might peer through, and that little speck of light will be different to the rest of the jungle. So they'll probably seeking out that little bit of light in comparison to what ackies are sort of seeking out, in the sense of they know they can climb on a rock and get everything they need.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. Yeah, I think that's
Yeah, no, it's interesting because the more we're sort of learning and the more that herpetoculture is sort of being pushed forward with lighting, it's like I'm trying at the moment the deep heat projectors alongside a halogen, but further enough apart to see what they prefer. And I've noticed pretty much consistently with gravid females, they will bask under the deep heat projector rather than the halogen. But same female, not gravid, basks under the halogen, and the male always basks under the halogen. Now and then they'll flip between, but for the general consensus, if I was noting it down, any observations of basking, 9 out of 10 times gravid females would be deep heat, and then non-gravid females. So this is a study I've done on my 1 male and 2 females. So gravid females 9 out of 10 times would be on deep heat, and then non-gravid females and male 7 out of 10 times will be on the halogen. But it's interesting because I think the deep heat is just infrared A, and I don't think it's infrared A. It's either infrared A and B, or
I think it's just one
A.
of them because there's not the light coming from it. I don't
exactly.
I've been hearing about it because I hear it on the Monitor Keeping podcast that Alan and Kai do, but I haven't really done research into that. But yeah, I think there's definitely a difference between the two. Yeah.
Yeah, so I find it interesting because to my knowledge, I could be wrong, please someone correct me if I am, but to my knowledge, the halogen, a true halogen, will give you infrared A, infrared B, and if you have a rock below, will give you infrared C. And then the DP is either just A or B, like you say, because it doesn't have that light. So you'd have thought the halogen would have been the better option, but it's almost like she knows that she doesn't need the other one to cook her eggs. So I'll have to have a look in this and even make a post about it to correct myself. But yeah, it's interesting that she knows she doesn't. For example, let's just say the deep heat's just A. It's interesting she knows she doesn't need B.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why would she choose the deep heat projector? So all silly stuff. I'm nowhere near smart enough to do studies on that, but it's interesting to observe it and be like, okay, you clearly know something that I don't.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's the thing. And that's the thing that I realized when I got into monitors and Charizard is that it's kind of constantly tinkering and changing. Like the way that I had Charizard's enclosure when I first got him versus when right before he passed, the enclosure looked so different between just learning his behavior, learning kind of more about their husbandry, kind of trying to introduce new concepts and things. And so, Tyranitars, I think I haven't changed. I've been changing decor and things like that, but the basic setup I've been keeping the same for now. But as new discoveries kind of come out, I'm definitely going to be implementing them and trying to apply it to his care as well.
Yeah. So just before we touch on basically what you're becoming an author and studying and what you're sort of learning and diving into, just quickly on husbandry. My first question is, what did you think of Dave Kaufman's Ackie in the wild? My second question is, how much do you notice your Ackie fully burrowing? And then my third question is, what do you do and how important is enrichment?
Number one, so I think overall, I think when you're doing just a snippet in a day, it's you have to just take into account that it's that one day, and it's more the trends that are important. I think it's still really good to get those readings to be hey, this is what it is in the wild. I think also, I think the substrate, I know he had mentioned lower substrate. I think that was a little bit too low of a recommendation, but I think if you have an enclosure that has a dig box, I think then doing 6 inches of substrate is okay. And honestly, like we were kind of been talking about, it really depends on the animal. Some animals are fine with 6 inches. Some animals need 18 or 2 feet. So it really is really just kind of seeing what your animal needs. And I think it depends on the life stage too. You know, obviously a baby that's like very small doesn't need the same amount as a large adult male. So I think that kind of really changes. And then, you know, I think the overall the diet recommendations, I think there was, too much emphasis on the non-whole food or the non-insect based foods. But other than that, like, I think it was still cool to see their native habitat. I think it was really great that he was recommending using the rockscapes, using that. And it was really awesome to see the humidity in the soil. So that was really awesome. And I actually just recently, I've gotten humidity probes and I've stuck them deep into my substrate. And my soil right now is sitting at like 99% humidity. So like I'm
perfect,
hitting that. Yeah. So
yeah.
So I think that is super important. I completely forgot about too because I got way into and talking about the video.
No, that's completely fine. You pretty much touched on two anyway. So I'll
digging.
elaborate.
Yes.
Yes, because mine don't. I've got 3, 1 boy, 2 girls. They live separately until I want to breed them. The male goes in with X female. So Mac, my male, will go in with Bonnie. They will breed. Mac comes out. Then Mac goes in with Sven. My other, it's a boy's name, but she came with the name Sven. So then we'll go in with Sven. We'll come out. Then Sven and Bonnie will just get time to lay and then have a break. And then Mac will go back in. As regards to digging, both females have a 2 foot wide, 2 foot tall, 18 inches, so 2 foot by 2 foot by 18 inch nest box, which I regularly check, make sure it's all the perfect consistency. And then they have about 6 inches of substrate in the enclosure. But they never dig, ever. But my theory is, because I missed every single varanid down once a week, and then I missed the ackies down to once other times. So they get missed. But again, I do a wet season and a dry season like they would naturally have. So because I'm in Northern Hemisphere, so from October, November through to January-ish, I will spray them 2 to 3 times a week. And then as we start to get into like June through to September, I'll only spray them once a week. But I think they don't burrow as much because it's not as intense and it's not as hot and it's not as arid as, for example, Australia in my tiny little vivarium that's just a microclimate. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that definitely, I think the temperature intensity is something too. And I think something else that, you know, is also playing a role is the humidity in the enclosure. Because I think, you know, obviously, you know, I've been doing some research into how ackies get water and hydration. And I feel like a lot of it, they get a lot of water from, you know, either, you know, like 70% of it from one study I was reading is like they get it from like what's called pulmonocutaneous exchange. So by breathing. And so if they're, you know, if you have, you know, in Australia where the air humidity is very low, you know, they have to dig down to those burrows to get to the humidity that you need. But if you're having an enclosure that's more humid than their native range, you're going to be staying out more. And so, you know, again, I also think it's very individual basic. Like Charizard didn't really dig that much. He would dig, but he wouldn't like make a burrow. He would just kind of like throw dirt around and be absolutely a nutcase. Tyranitar, it's funny actually. Like there was an observation. Like I always cycle my substrate. So when I start to see my humidity start to dip, and we can get into this more a little bit when I'm seeing my study, but when I start to see my humidities dip below like where I like them to be, I keep mine a little bit higher just because they do get a lot of their water through their lungs. I try to keep it between 50 to 60% during the day, and then I let it spike up really high at night. But I noticed that there was one night I was out of town, and then I came back and the humidity had went down. And Tyranitar actually, because I have a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot, I have a dig box that's higher and that he can get down deeper into. Tyranitar actually was in the dig box when this humidity started going down. So I think having that, even if they aren't an ackie that typically digs, I think giving them the choice, either having a deep substrate basin or having a dig box is super important, because then they can actually they have the opportunity to do it. It's all about choice. But yeah, I think that's kind of my thing with digging.
No, again, 100%. We're exactly on the same page there. And I think for the sake of giving them, like you say, even if it's just a small one, it doesn't have to be the whole enclosure. That gives them the option to have that microclimate. And if you are really busy on, for example, I'll spray them on a Sunday and a Wednesday, and if I'm really busy on Wednesday, I go, oh no, I forgot to spray my ackies. At least they have got that dig box.
Yeah.
And it only takes forgetting it. By the sounds of it, we'll get into it when we speak about your, like, would you call it a thesis? Would it be classed as a thesis or a study?
It's a study. Yeah, it's definitely a study.
Yeah. So when we get into the study, by the sounds of it, we'll speak onto it. So just my final point before we get onto it is, what do you do in regards to enrichment, and how important do you think it is in the life of a monitor lizard?
I think it's super important because, I mean, granted, you know, I feel like that I hate the term, but it's like there's a stigma of lizard brain. And I think monitor lizards definitely, I mean, all reptiles kind of defy that lizard brain stereotype in their own ways. But monitor lizards, especially just because of how smart they are. I like to provide environmental enrichment. So I have, like, you know, fake plants in the enclosure. I try to change up the positions of different things and different structures. I try to, you know, like when I'm cleaning things, you know, it changes the sense of them. You know, dietary enrichment, you know, I just offering a variety of insects, making sure that he's not just eating the same thing every day. I also interact with him a lot. Like, I am, you know, in kind of my taming process with him, like I actually like tongue feed him. He crawls up onto my arm. So I try to be an active part, and I try to play a role in that enrichment as well. Eventually, when he gets big enough, because he's only like 8 months old right now, about to be 9, I want to try to harness train him so I can actually get him outside, get him natural outdoor UV, because that's really good from the sun, let him be out in the sunlight. You know, so I think things like that are really important. And then, like, also having opportunities to dig, having opportunities to exercise, climb, do everything that they need to do.
Yeah, no, me and you are on the exact same page. I agree. Even silly stuff like you say, mixing in something different, like a little bit of leaf litter. Not with my ackies, but I put a shed snake skin in with my peach rate the other day. 1, so the isopods can eat it, and 2, just a different smell, different texture, just something for it to explore. Didn't think it would cause it any harm, and within 2 days the isopods had, like, sort of disintegrated it and broke it down. Anyway, so yeah, I again completely 100% agree with that, and it's, for me, myself becoming part of their daily enrichment and their daily activity is very important. 1, for their mental welfare, and 2, so I know my animal, so I can, for example, Mac, my male, completely hands up. I'd been really busy one week and I hadn't seen him for 3 or 4 days, and this was during the breeding period, and I took him out to check him like I always do, and he had a couple of nip marks on his tail, where obviously he's probably being too rambunctious, and Sven was like, no thank you, and completely hands up, got busy. It's not acceptable, but that's why it's so important to make sure you know your animal. And I know it sounds silly, but if him and Sven, it's mainly Sven, because him and Bonnie are like the perfect couple, him and Sven, sometimes they fight. But I know if he's been having a fight with Sven, because he sits up really high at the very top of the enclosure, and it's almost like he's sulking, and it takes time to learn that, but he never does it. And then normally I'll go in there and I'll check on him, and he will literally be like, why have you done this to me? I'm like, I'm sorry, come on, we can take you back to your enclosure. He's like, just put me in with Bonnie. Bonnie's really nice. So
yeah,
but yeah, so learning your animals, I think, is very important, because like you said, and as I found with my Tristus, literally 2 hours she was fine to past. So it's so important to know your animals so you can try and pick up on that slight change.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Before it's too late.
Yeah, and like I mentioned with that Euromastets I had, I just noticed he was sleeping on the cool side, which he never did before. And then, you know, that's what got me kind of keeping an eye on him. And that was honestly the first sign that I saw that he was starting to get sick. So yeah, like just knowing how they act and how they behave is super important.
Yeah, and that sort of leads us perfectly into your study. So I'll let you take the reins of this, and I'll sort of chime in sort of some thoughts and voice some opinions. So you're doing a study on gout in odatria,
yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah, and so for, you know, if you're not familiar, I mean, I feel like we all, especially if we're in the monitor world, we kind of know what, you know, we've heard of gout. It's like this scary thing that we've heard, but essentially what gout is an excess uric acid crystals in the body. And so uric acid is, you know, when your monitor poops, the white portion of the poop is the uric acid. And so reptile kidneys, you know, some reptiles, it depends on the order and the species, but most lizards, and all varanids at least, produce uric acid as their way to excrete nitrogen and things like that from their bodies. And so when there are conditions, and I'll kind of talk about those conditions, but if there are conditions that either reduce the excretion of uric acid or they increase the amount of nitrogen the body's getting, uric acid crystals can actually, because they're super insoluble, and that's how reptiles conserve water, they can actually deposit into different parts of the body. And so there are two main forms of gout. There's articular gout, which is usually when we're thinking of gout, that's what we see. It's the very painful, swollen finger or digit. And that's usually, what most people see when they see a gout, and that's what most people think of. There's another form that's a little more insidious that's called visceral gout. And so viscera is just the inside. So that means that there's actually gout crystals that are inside the body. And so those are the two main forms of how this disease manifests. And honestly, the same animal can have both forms of the disease. Like Charizard, when we did the necropsy on him, he had gout all through. I had mentioned that Charizard wasn't using his back legs. He actually had gout in his spinal column, and he was compressing his nerves, which is why he wasn't using his legs. And he also had gout all throughout his organs. And so, this disease, and it's very common too, so it's a disease that, when you're in vet school, that's one of the big reptile diseases you learn, up there with metabolic bone disease and things like that. And so, it's surprising because, there's a lot of literature that talks about gout and talks about, it's like this and this, but there's not really studies that look at the husbandry and look at other factors with the animals and really kind of especially focus on the odatria and seeing why. Because also I've been a part of the Ackie monitor community for 3 years. I feel like I've been starting to see more and more Ackies dying of gout, and I feel like there's been more people saying, oh, I have gout, oh, my Ackie died of gout. And so it's kind of with Charizard's passing, I really started kind of diving into gout, I guess maybe as a way of kind of processing what happened with him. And I realized that, wow, this is happening a lot. And so I initially was just focusing on Ackies, and I was just going to look at Ackies and gout in them. And then talking to some advisors and kind of, thinking about it a little bit further, I was spreading it to all the Australian odatria. So, the tristis, the condorums, the primordius, the Kimberley rocks, the pilbaras, so I'm kind of looking at all of those all the odatria that live in Australia, essentially. And so, the main things I'm looking at are, I'm really looking at the lineages, I'm looking at the, all the husbandry parameters we've been talking about: substrate type, how deep is it, how are they maintaining hydration in their animal, humidity levels, temperatures, diet, what are they supplementing, how often are they eating, what are they eating, and then I'm also looking at when did gout develop? Did it develop when the animal was younger? Did it develop when it was older? Did it, what did they use to treat gout? Did they pursue treatment at all? If the vet, when they did do the necropsy, what did they find on the necropsy? And then, things like that. And so the main things I'm kind of, I'm looking to try, and I have 11 animals in the study so far. So I have the majority of them are Ackies. I have 2 Pilbara rock monitors, and I have a Kimberley rock monitor. But the main things I'm really looking at, I'm trying to correlate, are there specific lineages where gout seems to be more predisposed? I'm looking to see, are there husbandry parameters that, are being commonly practiced that actually, in fact, seem to be common? And, I can't say, I won't be able to do statistical stats with the study, but I can say this, all these animals that have died of gout, they all have this. I think we need to be, I can make husbandry recommendations, and then this is kind of more of a springboard study to then, for further investigations, something that has more of a statistical power, things like that. And then also what I'm hoping for is that this can then be, not only applied to Ackies and, into odatria, but then can be applied to the larger monitor lizards, but applied to other reptiles in general. And so I'm looking at all the husbandry and the lineages because, with gout, we talked about it, it happens when there's too much uric acid, but what really causes that? And so one of those things is husbandry. So the two big ones with that are chronic dehydration and diets too high in protein. So with chronic dehydration, if you're not providing if the animal's not getting access to water, or, if you get a wild caught animal and it's super dehydrated from that process, and you don't properly rehydrate them, things like that. And then, if they're eating diets too high in protein, and that's especially, that's a little bit more true for back in the day, in the 60s and 70s when iguanas were being fed dog food and mealworms and things like that. but still can apply
Yeah.
to animals in general. And then there's kind of more of the medical things where, they can, if there's infections that, or anything that affects kidney function. So whether that be infections, whether that be cancer, whether that just be congenital things. And that's kind of really the main reason why I'm looking at the lineages. It's like, are there lineages, because as, with ackies in Australian animals in general, we have a very small captive bred pool. So eventually, and they've been in the hobby for several, for decades now. So that inbreeding index is starting to increase slightly. So when you inbreed, you get, you are more predisposed to congenital abnormalities. You have weaker immune system. So I'm looking at the lineages to see, are there specific bloodlines that seem to be more predisposed to this than others? And so, I'm still it's still in the process, and I'm still collecting data. So, if you have if any of the listeners, if you guys know of animals, or if you have any animals that have died from gout and you brought them to the vet and they got a necropsy, please let me know so I can add them to the study. Ideally, I'd like to get around 20, but and so I'm like a little over halfway there right now. But ideally, I'd like to try to get 20. I feel like with that would be a really good amount of animals to kind of then really draw some comparisons and draw okay, this is what this is. And I'm not also only looking at the husbandry, I'm also looking at the insects themselves and looking at nutrition, because a lot of times, I feel like, especially in the veterinary field, I feel like a lot of us are very focused on calcium because, we're trying to prevent metabolic bone disease, things like that. But, insects have a lot of other nutrients inside them, like protein, some uric acid contents, other things. And so I'm also looking into that as well to try to see, if there's any correlations with that.
Yeah, no, that's it's incredibly credible that you're doing that. And like I say, if anyone knows of anyone or has, please reach out to Mr. Tyranitar, the Accie's dad. And I didn't have a necropsy done, but I'd be more than happy to help. But obviously, then you can't draw a true conclusion for my tristis.
Yeah.
So it's almost pointless. So I get that. But that's interesting that you say it's either quote unquote hereditary or could be hereditary. Because I only knew about high levels of protein as well as chronic dehydration. I wouldn't, obviously, other than hydration, I wouldn't have thought it could be husbandry elements. So that's also really interesting. Because I remember a Kimberley rock monitor back when, before I sort of knew as much as I knew now, and it just had an inflamed finger. And at the time, I was just like, is it stuck shed? Like, what's wrong with it? And I was just sort of assured it was fine, this, that, and the other. And this was going back. But I was like, looking back on it sort of nowadays and leading up to this conversation, I was thinking, I bet you that animal had gout. But like I said, I didn't know. And it's good that yourself is trying to push it out there and making sort of, you made your post obviously when charizard passed away, and there are people that are trying. I know Arcadia are really pushing, not necessarily gout and odatria, but they're really pushing supplementation in the sense of it's just not calcium. You need to sort of make sure that you're looking at your insect intake, what's in the insect, making sure you're not overdosing in this, making sure you're not underdosing in that. And it's really interesting you say about the inbreeding, because the amount of people that will breed ackies, like I've had, obviously I breed ackies, mine aren't related as regards to siblings, they're probably distant cousins. But people buy 4 or 5 and they go, I'm just going to breed them. And I go, whoa.
Yeah.
Try and buy 4 or 5 from someone else, because as much as mine aren't, but the problem is you'll breed them, someone will buy 4 or 5 from you, they'll breed them, someone will buy 4, and then in 20 years' time, you have literally no new bloodlines. And especially with animals that, for example, Timorensis, so the Timor monitors, to my knowledge in the UK, there's only 4 pairs / trios above ground. I have one of which. So mine are all unrelated, first generation captive bred wild caught parents. So I know their bloods are good. But the problem is, if I have babies, I need to swap with the breeders. Otherwise, in 10 years, those are all going to have issues as well. So that's really interesting. And I think as a hobby, we need to push to make sure that we are keeping bloodlines true and we are making sure that we are breeding the healthiest animals. There's nothing wrong. For example, I've got a baby Ackie that was born really small and it's currently still really small. That will just be a pet only Ackie. Yeah. He's healthy, he's feeding, he's fine. But I would rather give him away to a pet only home than try and make money on him for someone to try and breed down the line, because you're only producing, regardless if it's going to lead to gout or it might result in, for example, pilbarensis, completely off subject, but 20 years ago, they were similar size to ackies, not as bulky, but in length. And now if you look at pilbarensis nowadays, they're literally like 30, 45 centimetre monitor lizards. And I think that's because, I don't know, this is just my opinion, because of inbreeding on inbreeding on inbreeding, and they've bred small animals to small animals to small animals. And as I believe it was Darwin that said, it's not the strongest or most adapt animal, it's the one most willing to change. So if you can change in the wild, you're going to survive. But in captivity, you don't need to change because it's all just there. So yeah, that's really interesting. And like I say, it's incredibly credible for you to be doing this study, because I think it is needed 100%.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, and it's just, yeah, like I was saying, there's so many people that, so many papers that talk about gout just in general as, and when we turn, and when we learn about gout, it's like, yeah, gout's just, it happens, it's this thing, but there's really, at least to my knowledge, granted, there may be some other studies that are out there, but there's really none that are like looking at husbandry and looking at other conditions that are, and then saying like, okay, like what can be different, what can be changed, and kind of tying the veterinary aspect of the understanding of the disease process and then understanding then the husbandry and tying them both together to try to promote, even better practices.
No, exactly. So for someone who's got an odatria, what are the first, I recommend, I want to start doing this myself, so I'm being a hypocrite because I don't at the moment, but I want to try and get a vet to come to me once a year because I have quite a large collection, just to go through everything, either take bloods or whatever they need to do, rather than me take it all to them. So what do you recommend to people that have got odatria in the sense of making sure their animals don't have gout, and what are the first onset signs, other than obviously an abnormality, back legs aren't working, spine's not working, inflamed fingers? Is there any sort of signs that you can sort of beat ahead of the curve as such?
Right. I mean, so I think like with reptiles in general, and it kind of applies to really all animals, whether it's a dog, a bird, or an ackie, but annual exams are definitely recommended. I recommend that for all of my clients, whether it's a bearded dragon or a green tree python or, a little like blue tongue skink. But, at those annual exams, it allows you to get blood work. It allows you then to, do a fecal, because even, captive bred animals, if they're, a lot of parasites use insects as intermediate hosts. So it's just essentially an intermediate host is just a jump host. So, it's good just to make sure that, if there is a parasitic infection, just to treat that, because that can lead to immune suppression, things like that. But definitely blood work is super important, because that allows you then to track things. And, you are able to measure uric acid on the blood work. However, and it's kind of the same thing. It's a little bit more severe than in mammals and stuff, because like mammals have, obviously they produce urea as their main nitrogenous waste, whereas reptiles produce uric acid. Uric acid as the number isn't 100%. It's not as sensitive for kidney function as like, mammals that they have creatinine and other values like that. So, in Charizard, it happened in Charizard's case, he had blood work done in February and his uric acid was normal. And then when I did the blood work, like a couple of days before he died, his uric acid was like 12 or 13. So, the uric acid may be normal in an animal that has gout, but the animal can still have gout. And so the number kind of lags behind the clinical disease. And so, I think regularly handling your animal, or at least like getting a visual on them, I think, the most common thing you're going to see is like the swollen toes. And then, I'm like trying to, with this study, I'm going to be learning more, and I'm going to be seeing some maybe other commonalities to try to see if there's other manifestations of disease that maybe, aren't necessarily 100% related to that classic view of gout, but hey, maybe need to be on, what's called a differential list, or like potential problems of what's causing it.
Yeah, no, that's what we could possibly do as well, is touch base in 6 months, a year's time, to sort of keep everyone updated on how obviously it's going. Because like you say, we're very early doors, and it's great that you're doing it. So everyone, please, even if you're not sure, reach out.
Yeah.
And it might be nothing. It might be, okay, it's worth taking this study. Obviously go to a vet, get your animals checked out. But if you've got an animal, because again, hands up, I had a Kimberley back when who had an inflamed finger, but I don't want to take too much, I don't want to take it away from myself, but it's my fault. Should have got it checked out. But the guy I brought it from just assured me it was completely fine. And it could have been, from listening to you now, he had it checked at the vets and the uric acid levels seemed okay, and it hadn't sort of shown up, but it had shown up, and I didn't know any different. Now I would be like, right, this animal clearly has gout, because I've got a lot more into the hobby. I've learned a lot more. So it's possible that you've just got one animal and it's got an inflamed toe, or my Tristus, I thought it was due to obesity, and it could have still be, but she really struggled to use one of her back legs. So again, could have been a sign of gout. I don't know. It's just sort of guessing off the top of my head. But I believe, was it Scales 13? His Ackie had gout as well.
Yeah,
and he made a great video about that. So and after this, go and check that out. Anyone who's interested. And he touches on it briefly. But if we touch on it now, what are the best measures for treating, like including veterinary, as well as what you can do in your own home for like treating gout, and the best precautions to take?
So definitely, dietary enrichment, just, focusing on a variety of insects. Definitely doing less roaches, because roaches are, they're definitely very high in protein. Some studies, and I'm looking to include this into my study, but certain roaches can be very high in uric acid contents as well. And so, I'm definitely going to look into that as, in terms of the study, to see what the participant animals have been fed. But, ensuring that you're feeding animals that are well hydrated and well hydrated insects. So making sure you're appropriately gut loading, making sure you're not just buying the insects from the pet store and dumping them into the lizard's cage, making sure you're taking the time to allow the insects to get all the nutrients and the hydration that they need, so then you're feeding your animal the best quality insects. Also, just making sure your animal has plenty of opportunity to hydrate. And so, just ensuring hydration is super important for them. And then, there are medical options. There are, if the gout is super severe and it's really affecting the digit, there is surgeries. So you could amputate, depending on that, if there's necrosis, things like that, you can amputate digits, you can do that, or you could surgically debride and remove all of the gout. There are drugs that can help to, reduce the gout as well, or at least reduce the accumulation of uric acid crystals. Those drugs can also be very taxing on the kidneys. So again, they have pros and cons. So, if it's not just like a husbandry thing, but there's also something going on with the kidneys, then you're adding a drug that also is affecting the kidneys. So it's kind of a give or take. But the main thing I kind of, and I describe it to clients too that have gout, or that have pets that have gout, it's that it's kind of like a benefit. Once the animal has gout, there's no way to it's like you can't really reverse the clock. Now you're just kind of managing them differently. And so kind of understanding, kind of the factors that then cause gout, and kind of how your animal developed gout, because how Scales 13's Ackie developed gout and how Charizard developed gout are probably very different. Although there's maybe some commonalities, but the exact reasons are going to be different. So managing the husbandry in different ways, but I think definitely focusing on the diet, focusing on hydration, and then just then using the veterinary medications or surgeries as needed.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you touched on the don't just take the bugs from the pet shop and then throw them in the enclosure, because, for example, locusts in the UK, they're kept in massive the breeders' factories, then they get boxed up in the little bug boxes, and then they get shipped to the local reptile shop, and then they sit there. But from being boxed up to being shipped could be 2 or 3 days, and then time by they get unpacked could be 2 or 3 days, and time by they sit on the shelf it could be 2 or 3 days. So you could be talking up to a couple of weeks. Probably not, because they're probably dead, but you can sometimes be talking up to a couple of weeks that this locust probably hasn't had anything in its system. So no food, no hydration, literally nothing. So what you're feeding is just, like you say, there's literally nothing in there for that lizard, because that locust is completely emaciated, or any bug for that matter. So yeah, gut loading, what I personally do, and please feel free to tell me if I'm wrong, and what you'd recommend, but what I personally do is I buy cockroaches, which I'm probably going to reduce now, especially on my odatria after this conversation, but I buy them from a big breeder, direct, and he's an old guy, and he runs out of his basement, and he just loves cockroaches, and he doesn't do it for any other reason, and he just loves cockroaches. So I go to him, and he sorts me out, and I get them really cheap, and we have great conversations on cockroaches. So I go to him, I know he doesn't feed them anything other than like natural grown greens and carrot and stuff like that. They don't get like processed, like some people feed them, I think it was like Cheerios or something like that. This is like Google recommends to feed them. And then I buy my locusts from either online or from my local reptile shop. And then I come home, I put them all into a massive tub, and then I feed them. They have water crystals as well as they have like fresh greens. But I don't know if there's a better option, to be honest. I mix it up and they get sort of collard greens or mustard greens, I suppose, as well as I don't feed them just stuff like iceberg or romaine lettuce because there's no nutritional content in there. As well as I do use I forget the name, but it's Arcadia Gutload Pro or something like that. So what would you recommend for myself and others is the best food / way to gut load your insects to try and avoid gout?
Right. And so, I think as I'm kind of do this study, and I kind of look into, I'll have some more information, but I think just overall, I think it's super important just to make sure, and there's like I think when we use gut loading, I think that the term is like, oh, you're feeding the insects, but there's different ways of feeding your insects. I think, especially if you have colonies, I think there's, I think a better way to describe it would be that there's maintenance feeding and then there's gut loading. Maintenance feeding is just, making sure your insects are eating and they're healthy and they're, reproducing and growing. So that can be, like greens, vegetables, things like that. When you're gut loading, you want to make sure that you're actually then, making those insects nutritious for your reptiles. So that's then like leaving them on that powder. They have like a water source, you can use like a wet paper towel or like a soaked cotton ball full of water, and then just leaving them on that, gut loading powder, for a day, and then the day after, then feed them to your animal. So, and Arcadia is a good brand. I know Missouri has another brand. And Missouri is a good brand for that as well. So I think that that's really important, like knowing the difference between the two. So like, gut loading isn't just feeding feeding the insects like lettuce and, in peppers and things like that. It's definitely beneficial because it helps them grow and helps them reproduce, especially if you're trying to create colonies. But it's then also equally important then to ensure that you're getting them on that gut loading powder, because that's actually going to have that's going to have even more of the nutrients, and then that's like, formulated to ensure that those insects then hold all the nutrients that your reptile can get.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a learning curve for myself then, because again, I've always said to people that I want to be as open and honest as possible because I feel like you can't learn unless you're willing to accept mistakes.
Yeah.
So I do, hands up, I put fresh greens alongside the gut load powder, but what I probably should do, and what I will do from now on, is do the fresh greens for a day or two just to get them rehydrated, and then take the fresh greens away because they're always going to choose that over the gut loading powder. And then I will decrease the fresh greens, get rid of the fresh greens, and then make sure they've got that gut loading powder 24, 48 hours, and then feed off, obviously supplemented as well. I have a multivitamin and I have a calcium, and I alternate. So if I'm feeding 3 times a week, I'll do calcium one, multivitamin the other, and then nothing on the other one. Would you say that's a good balance, or would you say I should up or decrease on any of those?
So, and just before I touch on this part, I definitely, I need to get a little bit better with the gut loading powders and things like that. And also then, certain insects, like for me, my grasshoppers, like I don't really know if they'll even eat the gut loading powder. So it's like really then kind of tailoring the gut loading process to the insect species. So, a way a cockroach eats is going to be different than the way a grasshopper eats, which is different from the way a mealworm eats. So kind of just then finding the right way to kind of go about it. In terms of the supplementation, I typically do calcium at every feeding just because, you can't overdose the calcium. So reptile, if a reptile gets excess calcium, they're just going to excrete it through their gut, excrete it through their poop. The way that they draw that calcium into their body is when they get vitamin D. And if you're having UV lights, and if you're taking your animal outside to get UV time, the main way they're getting UV light is through, their bulbs and through the sun. And so they're able to produce enough D3 that they can on their own. So I don't like the calcium with D3 powders. I tend to feel like, because you can overdose your animal easily on D3. You can't overdose them on calcium. So I would just do the calcium. The multivitamin, I typically try to do it once a week. I'm not as I'm not as rigid on that as I probably should be. The important thing for them, and for insectivorous animals at least, is that when the multivitamin you use, you need to make sure the vitamin A content is actually vitamin A. Because a lot of times you'll see the multivitamin content in some of them, it has beta carotene in it. And the theory behind it and why it's in a lot of the multivitamin products is because, it's an inactive form of vitamin A. You're not actually going to cause the animal to, because you can easily overdose with vitamin A. So you're like, if you're using its inactive form, they're still getting the vitamin A and they can convert it themselves in their body, so it's not as bad. But not every reptile has the enzyme to convert beta carotene to vitamin A. So, herbivorous reptiles like tortoises, iguanas, things like that, they can do that. Insectivorous animals like geckos, and there's no studies on it, but I'm assuming monitor lizards as well, especially the odatria, they can't convert beta carotene to vitamin A. So it's really important that whatever multivitamin you are using, actually, when you look at the ingredients, it literally says vitamin A. If it says beta carotene, you're not giving them the vitamins that they need, or at least that vitamin.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'll be honest, I didn't know that myself, so I'm sure there's others that didn't. So I will check mine when we finish here. And yeah, I knew that you can overdose on D3, so I don't supplementate with D3. I only supplement calcium, but I'll be honest again, I didn't know that you can't overdose on calcium. I've seen and spoken to a fellow Indicus, a mangrove monitor keeper, and himself and I have both noticed if we sort of give a lot of calcium, so I have a female and she's laid a few eggs for me, and I can sort of pinpoint when she's starting vitellogenesis and when she cycles and broods. So I up the calcium then. And I've noticed the more calcium she has, the less time she spends, or at least tries to spend, under UV. So it's almost like, but then there's no D3. So it's sort of an oxymoron, because I understand the science in the sense of if they need the calcium as well as the UV to sort of turn it into, so they don't get metabolic bone disease. But she'll sulk around and sort of spend a lot more time in the shade after a sort of heavy calcium feed. If I do like a lobster or a shrimp with the shell on with calcium, she won't bask. But if I feed her like a chick, she'll bask. So it's almost like she's like, right, I've got too much at the minute, I need to sort of chill. But I don't, like you say, because it's not with D3, so it doesn't really make sense. So she obviously knows something's going on, because another guy's noticed the same thing. But this is just sort of me waffling. So I'm not saying to people like, you don't need to give UV, because personally I think every reptile needs UV regardless of species. That's a conversation for a different day. But for me personally, I'm on for the correct UV for the correct animal. But yeah, that's good to know, because I'll make sure that my multivitamin has vitamin A, and then I know for a fact I don't have D3 calcium, but I'll start to make sure that I do it, because it's very easy to get lazy, and I find like I've finished work late and I've got to do this and I've got to do that. I just throw some bugs in there, but it's not good enough. So I think myself, and I'm sure others will sort of resonate, that we need to do better. We need to step up, because I know how hard it was losing an animal due to ill care, in my care or not. I only had her for 2 months, but like I say, one of my Timors is getting overweight. He's not to the point yet, but I probably, after this conversation, probably will take him to a vet, because you just don't know. Because in my head I'm like, he's a little bit porky, but that could be the start of something, and I'm like, I'll just cut the food down, blah 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 blah. So I think it's very important now, after speaking to you, to be on even more on the ball. Especially, I think I've got 17 varanids in my care, so it's no excuse, and it comes to the point where if you're too busy, don't have that many animals. So I'm sure other people are in the same boat. So I sort of appreciate this conversation in the sense of like opening my eyes in, I'm not doing enough and I need to do better. Not that I'm doing badly, but you can always improve. And I think anyone that is resonating with this, it would be a good kick up the bum as such, to make sure that we're on top of that, to try and prevent any ill effects for our captives pushing forward.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I mean, like we're both kind of saying, it's a constant learning curve and a constant learning process. There's always something to learn, and especially when I first had Charizard to how I take care of Tyranitar, it's a completely different process. And still with Tyranitar, like I'm still kind of keeping my eye out and like reading, and that's the benefits of being a vet. And also, I'm constantly looking for resources, and I'm constantly trying to find other husbandry things to try to make sure that I'm giving him the best care that he can. And I'm constantly looking at my parameters and tinkering with them and thinking of ways to ensure that I'm giving him the best life that he can have.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Like, you can do as much research as you like until you keep said animal. You always do research regardless, but until you keep an animal, you don't know. Like, you read all of this stuff in a book, or you'll watch it all on a YouTube video, or you'll listen to this podcast, and then you'll get the animal and you go, oh God, what's it doing now? Or why is he doing this? Or why is she doing that? Or is it supposed to like fall off the rock? And like when they've got like shed stuck on their neck, and they'll find, like you say, they'll find a rock and they'll actually do that, and their mouth will open because they're trying to angle to get certain. First time you see that, you think they're like having a fit. You're like, oh God, it's got epilepsy or something. It's just getting shed. It's just getting shed off.
Yeah.
So it's all silly learning stuff, but no care guide that you read will say to you, your Varanid will randomly like ick its neck, open its mouth, and rub its face on a rock. So the first time you see it, you're like, oh God, is that okay? And if you work, you're probably not going to see it until like a random Saturday. You're like, oh God, my lizard's not okay. So it is very much about learning your animals. And again, the personality animals. I have 4 Ackies, 3 of which I breed. I've got Laszlo, who's, I'll send you a video of him when he's out tomorrow because the lights will be off. But he's a little special boy, a little rescue boy. And he's 4 years old, but he is 13 inches, maybe, total length. He's tiny, like absolutely tiny. He's like a little keg barrel, and and his toes are all funny and his nails are all funny. And I'll be completely honest, I think he was the result of inbreeding. And I've sort of just had him for a while, and he's just special, and I don't breed him. He's, like I said earlier, he's a pet only animal. But his personality in comparison to my 2 females, in comparison to my other male, like they all completely are people. And people probably see reptiles in the sense of a blanket term and going, oh, lizard brain, calculus, cold-blooded killers. But then she'll come out onto my shoulder and sort of come up my face. Bonnie doesn't like people. She wants to bite. Mac actually physically sulks and has like tantrums. So I think learning your animal and learning their little quotes, like we've sort of themed of this podcast, 1, you know if there's sort of anything wrong, and then 2, you can learn your animal in the sense of learning better husbandry, learning better care, learning what they're benefiting from, learning what they're not benefiting from, learning what they like, learning if they like to climb, learning if they want to dig, and silly stuff like that. So is there anything else on the sense of your study that you want to touch upon? Because obviously you're a lot more in depth on the subject than I am.
That's really it. I mean, it's still very much in the early stages right now. And if you want to learn more about it too, in the most recent issue of Reptiles magazine, the September-October issue, I do have an article about it as well. And you can see pictures of Charizard and Tyranitar in there. And it talks about a lot of the things that we talked about here. But, so I think once I start to get more information, and once I start to kind of have more cases, like I definitely would love to I'd love to come back on. We can definitely talk about more about it and like kind of what the study, like what findings I've been seeing, and as it starts to get published. But I think it's still very early right now, but I think that it's something that's very needed, just because it seems to be a disease that seems to be one that's prominent in a lot of different reptile species, not just monitor lizards, but something that seems to be increasing in ackies, and something that there's acknowledgement that it exists, but nothing that's saying like, yes, this is why, because obviously if this disease was happening just, if this was like a random disease that happens, it would happen infrequently. But if this is a disease that's happening frequently, there's something that is going on either in the husbandry or in the animals' bodies themselves that is occurring. So we have to kind of figure that out.
Yeah, no, it'll be very interesting to see if you can prove out that it's on certain like bloodline lineages, because I think that will again kick people up the bum to make sure we're getting the cleanest, healthiest, strongest animals to continue to push the hobby forward. Because as much as you or I probably won't see it, but our grandkids, if ever one day, probably won't be able to have the Ackies of today. Like my male Mac, he's all of 26 inches. He's a beast. He's a big Ackie monitor. But I worry that they'll go the same route as Pilbarensis, in the sense of people are breeding smaller ones, and then a lot of people, I can only speak for the UK, but a lot of people seem hell-bent on breeding Ackies, and they'll buy any old animal just to breed them, to pump them out. And currently the market is saturated. So I'm personally taking a step back, and they're going to breed anyway, but I'll probably just feed off the eggs. I'm not in this for money. I'm in this for passion. So if they're going to cycle, I'd rather them lay fertile eggs. So I'll just feed off the babies. But the problem is with people, they just want money and they don't care at the animal's expense. So they don't care for the health issues, and they don't care. I'm hoping the sort of consensus of this podcast will want people to push. Like, I've taken so much from this already, and I'll probably watch this back myself. I'll be like, right, I need to do this. So I'm hoping people watching will be the same. And I don't really want to, well, I do want to appeal to those people that don't care about their lives and just want money, because come to the good side and actually enjoy the animals. But yeah, no, I'm very grateful for your humility, in the sense of that you're willing to share such a negative, traumatic experience in your life to better the health and husbandry and captivity of tyranitar, my ackies, and maybe even tyranitar's children one day, and my ackies' children, and children's 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 children. I'm sure it's a big feat, and obviously it takes one man to change the world, and you're on that journey now. So I commend you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely, it's a long road. I mean, it started, when Charizard passed away in March of 2022. And so we're only, we're still only a couple months in, but, just the I have a little iPad I have like an app called Notability, and I have a folder for this research paper, and the amount of papers that just keep on getting added on and on and on. It's daunting some days, and it's just like, oh my goodness, there's a lot. But, like you said, like I'd like to just get this information out here, because, I'd just like to make sure that we can maybe just help either change the husbandry, or change, discontinue breeding certain bloodlines, to just make sure that we're providing the best quality life just for the animals.
No, 100%. I couldn't have said it about myself. And like I say, it's great of you to put that onto your shoulders, because I've had an animal die of obesity. I've had an animal in the past that I now know probably had gout, and I've started a podcast. This is, again, very early doors for me, and I'm hoping to push husbandry and get people like yourself on. So in a way, my way, I'm doing something, but I'm not doing anything about the health issues. So I'll be the first person to say, like, it's great, congratulations. And you are going to have days where you're going to go, oh, like, is this and this, that. But you, as well as I, know that in the long run, for odatria, because odatria is so widely kept as well, and there's so many, like, diversity of species. So for odatria, this is a monumental, like, pebble, but it's going to roll, and it's going to roll, and it's going to roll, and before you know it, this will be, like, in everyone's minds, and in 10 years' time, everyone's going to be like, 99% locusts / grasshoppers, we need to do this, and we need to do that, and it would have started from you and Charizard.
Yeah, definitely. It's a nice way to kind of honor him a little bit, too. It feels like, I mean, he's always living in my heart, and, I have the Instagram account, so it's great to see the pictures and go through, but it's just kind of nice it's like almost like, he's kind of immortalized a little bit through this.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a sense of beauty for him, because in the sense of, he may not be here with us in like matter, but he's with all of us in spirit, and in 100 years' time, when people are still keeping ackies, people are going to look back on it, and it's going to be like, whether it's the 100 years, whether it's 10 years, people are going to look back and they're going to go, this started with just one guy and one lizard. So, like I say, I can do nothing but commend you. And I honestly, I'm so appreciative for the conversation. Like, this has been amazing. I was really nervous to have you on, I'm not going to lie, because I'm just the guy that keeps lizards, and like, you're like this vet and smart and doing all this. And I was really nervous, but this is honestly, this has been amazing. So thank you so much for the time. And I'm hoping that this gets loads and loads and loads of views, because not in the sense for me, because I don't care about that. People need to hear this, and that's why I'm doing this. So hopefully this does really well, and 100% love to have you back on.
Yeah.
3 monthly, 6 monthly, whatever the case may be. And we can see where the study goes, and we can see hopefully my audience grows by then. So the message will just keep getting, and if there's anything I can do to help, and my platform, your platform's bigger than mine anyway, but your platform, my platform, if there's anything I can do, then please just shoot me a message.
No, I appreciate that. And I mean, thank you for having me on. You know, ever since we started following each other, I've always been like following your ackies and your lizards, and I've been following your YouTube channel and your Captive Raptors podcast. And so it's nice to be on here, and it's nice to just connect with other people that are passionate about monitor lizards. And it's a great community. And I mean, Charizard allowed me to enter this world, and so it's just really grateful to meet very, very like-minded people.
Yeah, no, that's the exact reason why I started this, is because when I got into Varanids, because I've been solely keeping Varanids for just Varanids for about 3 years. I've been keeping reptiles for a lot longer, but just Varanids for the last 3 years. And I found before you're in it, it's almost like a secret club, and then you get in it, and then people are a bit more warming to you because you're in it. And I sort of want to bridge that gap in the sense of I want to get people such as yourself who are doing these amazing studies, and then I want to get someone on who's just brought their first Ackie and they have no idea and just want to shoot the ship and just ask all these questions. And I want to get keepers of all multitude of species of multiple ages, multiple groups and sizes, and 99% focus on just the Varanids, because I think the Varanids, because I think they get such a bad rap and people take them for granted because they are that next step up lizard, not even in the sense of husbandry, but in the sense of just the respect they command, in the sense of some of them can really hurt you, and the respect that they command in the sense of it's like having a parrot. They're just so smart.
Yeah. And I mean, I feel like also it's like, I think monitor lizards get also probably some bad press because I feel like most people, when they think of monitor lizards, they see the wild-caught savannas and Nile monitors, and they see how not nasty, that's not the right word, because I mean that animal's been through a traumatic experience just trying to get to get to that expo table or get to that reptile shop. So, you know, they just see how that animal already views humans, and they're like, okay, yeah, monitor lizards, you know, they have this negative perception of them. But then it's like when you get a captive bred animal, or you actually work with that wild caught animal, you start to like realize and start to see like that hidden side that they have of them, and that emotional capacity and intelligence. And you know, it's almost like, I mean, I kind of joked around with this. Like, I kind of felt like, you know, I felt like Charizard was almost dog-like in the way that he would interact with me and want to just like, in just the way he would look at me. And Tyranitar is kind of funny. He's more of a cat. He kind of like has always this kind of concerned look on his face, and he's always like looking at me, but he's a little more wary. It's like he's wary, but not. He's much more like bold than Charizard ever was, especially at his size. But yeah, I think when you get into that, like you said, exactly what you said, when you get into that world, you realize how charismatic these reptiles can be.
Yeah, no, it's just quickly on that, my mangrove monitor, she would have been wild caught because there's not many people captive breeding them, and if they are, they're in the States or in Indonesia. So the guy I got her from had her in literally a tiny box. I joke and say we keep lizards in tiny boxes because compared to the world they are, regardless of the biggest enclosure in the world. But she was generally in a tiny box. So Mango is probably 2.5 foot total length, and she was in a 4x2 ish with nothing but a red bulb. That's all she was in.
Oh my God.
So she would have come from the rainforest of the Solomon Islands. She would have been chucked in a bag. She would have been chucked in a boat. She'd have been chucked in a pet shop, and then she's chucked in this tiny little box. And the guy was planning on building her this good enclosure, which I did see. But for me, don't get her if you're not. But anyway, so when I first got her, I've had her for just over 2 years now. She hated people. She still does, but I love her for that. But I agree. People see that they. The problem is, it's not a problem, but it is a problem. On social media, you see someone who has a really tame mangrove monitor, but then 99% of mangrove monitors are psychopathic, just psychotic, terrorized, traumatized. Just get me out of here. Like, she escaped once. I don't know how she did it, but she escaped once, and she got on top of my fridge and on top of this enclosure here and knocked stuff off everywhere. And I opened the door and I thought I got burgled because there was stuff everywhere. And they walked into the main part of my house, and she's just cuddled up in the hay with the guinea pigs, not done any damage to them at all. She's just cuddled with the guinea pigs. And my girlfriend was like, "Oh my God, has she hurt my guinea pig?" I was like, "No, it's fine, oh my God." And Mango's like, she doesn't scare me, but I definitely respect her. And she like puffs herself up and she's like, "And what?" And I'm like, "It's fine, you can stay there. Oh, it's fine." So I don't think people realise the majesty and respect that these animals command, but I'm hoping to change that sort of one podcast at a time, really.
I agree. Yeah, 150 million %.
So we're almost at hour and 40 minutes. So I'm going to have a running theme of podcasts. So I'm going to ask 2 questions as closing questions.
All right.
So question 1 is, what advice would you give to someone starting the reptile hobby? It doesn't have to be to do with monitors, just someone starting the reptile hobby. What's the one piece of advice you'd give?
I'd say research. Just that's the most important thing. Because I mean, granted, like, we've kind of been talking about, you learn a lot as you keep the animal, but to even get the animal, to know what enclosure to get it, to know what lights to get it, to know what temperatures you need to hit, to know what you need to feed. Do I need to start a grasshopper colony? Because when I got my Ackie, I didn't think I'd be living with a bunch of grasshoppers and roaches, and so it's like kind of doing that research and kind of just and doing the research from multiple sources. So YouTube videos. Reptifiles is a wonderful website. They have lots of great information.
It is, yes.
If you have a very reliable reptile vet, going to them, getting some information from them. Facebook groups are great. Learning from some of the breeders, things like that, but just like looking for the commonalities, because everyone's going to do it differently, and there's multiple ways to keep an animal healthy. So some people have Ackies in 4x2x2. Some people have Ackies in like 6 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot. It's really, as long as the environmental parameters and the enrichment of the animal are being met, then as long as all that's being met, both enclosures can work. It really just ultimately depends on how many animals you have, how much space you can do. Because even though I have a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot, I do eventually, when I get a house and I do that, I want to get him a bigger enclosure. So that's, part of my goals. But it depends on your space. It depends on the size of the animal, that, how many animals you have. And it depends on, what your goals are. But I think that really just research is the most important thing, because you can't start anywhere without, 1, figuring out what the heck an Ackie is, and then 2, how to take care of one.
No, that's spot on. I couldn't agree with more than that myself. Like you say, because you can get an animal and it will teach you everything, but if you don't know where to start, the animal's probably going to die before it's got a chance to teach you anything.
100%.
So, and then the final question isn't to do with reptiles, but it's just, what's the best piece of advice you've personally ever received, or the first thing that pops into your mind?
Trying to think. You got me with this one. I gotta think.
My one, I have 2 that resonate with me currently.
Okay.
First one is, sometimes you find yourself in a dark place, but remember, seeds have to be planted in order to grow. And the other one is, this too shall pass. They're my current, where Paul sits right now in life, best advice I've had. Doesn't have to be as deep as that.
I'm probably going to get deep. It's just kind of like where I am right now. But really, the main thing is living in the moment. I've been kind of just struggling, just kind of anxiety and just things like that lately. And just kind of like my brain just kind of goes down these crazy, tornadoes of just kind of spiraling and things like that. But just being in the moment, like enjoying when I get to hang out with tyranitar, enjoying when I get to hang out with my fiance, and just taking, you can only be in the now, and you can't control what happened, 5 hours ago. You can't control what might happen in the future, but you can just control what happens in the present. So just focus in the present.
I think I 100% agree. That's beautiful. And thank you for admitting on the whole mental health side. Yeah. I personally suffer with depression, and have had a long bout with that. So hence my deep quotes. So thank you very much for your honesty and sort of men coming together as such. And just quickly on here, anyone as well as yourself, you've got me on Instagram. If you're ever struggling, I've done a lot of work on mental, mindful well-being. Just shoot me a message. You're not alone. Whoever's listening, you're not alone. Shoot me a message. I think that's a beautiful place to end it.
All right. Sounds great. Thank you for having me so much. This is great.
No, that's completely fine. Again, Mr. Tyranitar the Accie's dad will be all links in the description, and I will make sure somehow I'll speak to you after this, but to get a link in the description or just a contact base for your study for animals that have got gout, because I think that is incredibly credible. And again, thank you so much for your time. I'm so appreciative for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
No worries. Well, I'll see you in the next episode, guys. Thank you for tuning in. This is me and Tyranitar the Ackies, Lizard Dad, out.
All right.